The U-Space regulatory framework comprises less than 30 pages, which is quite reasonable as regulations go. And yet I keep hearing statements about U-Space that are not actually covered by the regulation. In this video, we'll take a look at the top 5 most popular U-Space myths, where they may have originated from, and what the regulation actually says. Let's go! Let's start with the first myth. BVLOS flights are only permitted in U-Space airspaces. Or a modified version, U-Space airspaces are a prerequisite for BVLOS flights. The European Implementing Regulation 2019/947 applies to operations of UAS. In most cases, flights beyond visual line of sight will fall into the specific category of UAS operations. The regulation states that the remote pilot is responsible to avoid any risk of collision with any manned aircraft, and to discontinue a flight when continuing it would pose a risk to other aircraft, people, animals, environment or property. But how does a remote pilot know, for example, that other aircraft are in the vicinity of their drone? If you take a look at the acceptable means of compliance and guidance material relating to operational risk assessments, you will find the keyword U-Space, for example, in the chapter about tactical mitigation measures. This means that U-Space is explicitly listed as a measure to remain well clear from and to avoid collisions with other aircraft. But it is not the only means. In fact, the regulation does not stipulate that U-Space is a prerequisite for conducting BVLOS flights. Neither do the AIM-CGM. And this is also consistent with the situation as it is today. Numerous BVLOS flights with valid operational authorizations are currently conducted every day, and this despite the fact that so far not a single U-Space airspace has been established. So let us be clear, BVLOS flights may of course also be operated outside of U-Space airspaces. Implementing Regulation 2019/947 applies. Let's move on to myth number 2. In U-Space airspace, all airspace users must register. The idea behind this statement seems to be that there is or should be a central authority that has knowledge about all airspace users. Well, this authority doesn't exist. Let's take a closer look. In U-Space airspaces, 4 types of traffic can occur. Unmanned aircraft weighing 250 grams or more that do not fall within the scope of model aircraft. In order to be allowed to fly in U-Space airspaces, operators of these aircraft must obtain a US flight authorization from a USSP before each individual flight and activate it immediately before takeoff. Then there is manned air traffic using air traffic control services. Here it is the responsibility of the responsible air traffic control unit to adjust the U-Space airspace geometry as required. There are no requirements for aircraft operators to register with a USSP. Then there is manned air traffic not using air traffic control services. In order to fly in U-Space airspaces, they have to make themselves electronically conspicuous. Registration is not required. And finally, there is a significant group of airspace users that are neither in contact with a USSP nor with an air traffic control unit, nor do they have to make themselves electronically conspicuous. These include drones weighing less than 250 grams being operated in VLOS, model aircraft and police, search and rescue, customs, military and firefighters. Yes, you heard correctly. Especially those airspace users who fly at low altitudes for operational reasons are generally not obliged to register or make themselves electronically conspicuous. And this applies to both manned and unmanned aircraft. In this respect, the statement that all airspace users in a U-Space airspace must register is incorrect. Of course, one could now ask why this is not required. After all, especially for reasons of safety, the desire for more information would be understandable. Well, this would entail major changes to the existing system of regulations that cover the allocation of responsibility for the purpose of safeguarding air traffic. It is therefore unlikely that this will be changed in the near future. Summarizing, not all airspace users are required to register in U-Space airspaces. I keep hearing the next myth over and over again. I'll have a U-Space airspace established above my factory premises to manage my drones safely. Well, interesting. But no. U-Space is a means of managing the common good airspace and is intended to assure fair access to the airspace. U-Space airspace is not private space. U-Space airspace is designated by the member states. If a U-Space airspace is designated by a member state, USSPs that are certified can offer their services for this airspace, and we are explicitly talking about USSPs in the plural. This means that a U-Space airspace is not exclusively provided with services by one USSP. U-Space is therefore explicitly not designed to be an instrument for managing drone traffic on a factory site. A U-Space airspace would be open to all UAS operators that meet the technical and organizational requirements. Myth number 4. USSPs control traffic and issue clearances to maintain separation. Alternatively, it is often said that USSPs issue clearances directly to drones. This is, how should I put it, utter nonsense. The assumption that USSPs control traffic and issue clearances to UAS operators probably stems from a confusion with the responsibilities of air traffic control in manned aviation. Air traffic controllers monitor air traffic and, in the event of conflicts between aircraft, issue clearances to pilots to maintain separation. Implementing Regulation 923/2012 defines air traffic control services as services provided for the purpose of preventing collisions and expediting and maintaining an orderly flow of air traffic. However, when we look at the U-Space regulation, there is no mentioning of USSPs being responsible for preventing collisions between aircraft. USSPs are obliged to provide U-Space services. These services include the provision of traffic information and the UAS Flight Authorization Service. Now you're probably saying, wait a minute, doesn't the UAS Flight Authorization Service ensure conflict-free flights? Well, as part of the UAS Flight Authorization Service, the flight plans submitted by UAS operators are checked to ensure that they do not overlap in terms of time and space. This is done before the flight takes actually place. During flights, USSPs only check for new circumstances, such as temporarily established airspace restrictions or conflicting flight authorization requests of higher priority. Both would require USSPs to revoke active flight authorizations. However, the U-Space regulation does not stipulate that aircraft maintain predefined separation minima. According to Article 11 of the U-Space regulation, UAS operators are responsible for avoiding collision hazards. So how do we deal with the assumption that USSPs would be talking directly to drones? The current version of the U-Space regulation stipulates that communication takes place exclusively between USSP and UAS operator. If, for example, a UAS flight authorization is withdrawn, the affected UAS operator is obliged to act accordingly. There is no mention in the regulation of drones receiving information directly from USSPs and taking automatic action based on this information. The AMCGM even explicitly state that responsibility cannot be transferred to the USSP. Would this be an option for a future version of U-Space? After all, the CESAR blueprint for the final evolutionary stage of U-Space speaks of a very high level of automation, connectivity and digitalization for both the drone and the U-Space system. Well, this would mean that responsibility for safety would be transferred from the UAS operators to the providers of U-Space services. And I personally think that this is highly unlikely. Now we come to our fifth and for this video final myth. In the long term, a single nationwide U-Space airspace will be established. There is no corresponding statement from the regulator regarding this claim, rather the opposite. Recital 3 to the U-Space regulation states that U-Space airspaces should be established in certain areas, such as primarily in those with an expected large number of simultaneous operations of UAS or areas where UAS operate alongside manned aircraft. It should be emphasized that the process of establishing a U-Space airspace is rather involved. Prior to designating a U-Space airspace, an airspace risk assessment must be conducted, in which potential risks have to be identified and assessed, and risk mitigation measures have to be defined. Various stakeholders must be involved in this setup process. This includes not only airspace users, but also stakeholders on the ground, such as cities or municipalities. And for those areas where in the future passenger drones are expected to be operating, the establishment of a U-Space airspace would not be particularly beneficial. In the guidance material of the U-Space regulation, EASA makes it clear that the operation of passenger drones will not be supported by U-Space for the time being. If passenger drones are also to be covered by U-Space, the entire U-Space regulatory framework would have to be reassessed. It is therefore likely that, for the foreseeable future, U-Space airspaces will only be established in selected areas. And when it comes to a single nationwide solution, a new integrative concept will probably have to be developed. These were our current top 5 U-Space myths. Do you know any other myths? Then please write them in the comments and we'll make another video on this topic. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video. Bye!